Happily, Professor Jeansonne has provided us with a very accessible one-volume biography that reflects a thorough understanding of the primary sources, as well as the rich secondary literature on Hoover and his times. It's clear that history has not been kind to President Hoover. Long the victim of slanders by New Dealers who painted Hoover as bearing responsibility for the Great Depression, it took Harry Truman to utilize the many talents and expertise of Hoover on behalf of the public. Hoover was able to restore his reputation and once again be seen as a valuable elder statesman. Americans are not known for their acuity in remembering events beyond today's headlines, and oftentimes not even that. For most, Herbert Hoover does not register as a familiar or even the common mistaken running joke as the inventor of a vacuum cleaner. In a way, this historical amnesia has its benefits because it allows people to approach Hoover's life and presidency with a blank slate. What they discover is a truly amazing story of a forgotten American, and it's beautifully captured in Professor Jeansonne's biography. Glen Jeansonne was born in Louisiana and received the PhD in history from Florida State University. He taught at the University of Louisiana at Lafayette and Williams College before joining the faculty at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, where he is emeritus. Author or co-author of 15 books, Jeansonne's interests range from Leander Perez, Boster of the Delta, to Elvis Presley, Reluctant Rebel, to Women of the Far Right, the Mothers Movement in World War II. His writings have received numerous honors, including his biography of Gerald L.K. Smith being nominated for a Pulitzer Prize in 1988. Jeansonne wrote the 5th volume in the acclaimed Hoover Presidential Foundation's definitive 6-volume study of Hoover's life. The Life of Herbert Hoover, Fighting Quaker, 1928 to 1933, covers the most controversial aspect of Hoover's life, that of his presidency. His new biography, Herbert Hoover, A Life, has been characterized by one reviewer claiming, Jeansonne energetically paints a colorful revisionist portrait of America's oft-maligned 31st president. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Glen Jeansonne.
Thank you very much, Tom. It's always a pleasure to be here. I spent 15 consecutive months here. I had a year-long grant that enabled me to get leave from teaching at the university, and I stayed straight through the summer before and the summer after the academic year. So it was 15 months in all. And I lived here in West Branch. I had an apartment right above Herb and Lou's Cafe. And I used to tell people it was the only bar and restaurant in the United States where you could get people to buy you drinks by telling them a Hoover story. Well, there are a number of people I need to thank for the book, for making the research materials available, and have facilitated the work in many ways. I want to thank Tom Schwartz for being exceptionally kind to me, and his predecessor, Tim Walsh, who was the director for most of the period that I was here, to Matt Schaefer, and Lynn Spencer, Spencer Howard, to Glenn Smith and Craig Wright, who facilitated the photographs that are included in the book. Lynn made the first selections, and then Craig helped us narrow them down and write the captions, and then produce the high-resolution copies that the publisher could use I also want to thank the people, two very close friends of mine, Phil and Dee Dee Deacon from Milwaukee, who helped me transportation wise in getting here and getting here on time, and have done many other good deeds for me as some of my closest friends in Milwaukee. My interest in Hoover goes back a long time, although I wouldn't have imagined writing several books about Hoover, and I have yet another one in mind, at least an idea for one. When I was a first-year graduate student at Florida State University, I took a course on U.S. history 1921 to 45, and we had to write a term paper since I was a graduate student. And I asked the professor, later became a close friend of mine, if I could write one on Hoover's role in the Depression. And he said no, because nothing happened. Well, I decided to look and see anyway, and I wrote the paper anyway, in spite of what he told me, and turned it in to him. And when he handed it back to me, he had written on it, A+, this was the best paper in class. I learned a lot about Herbert Hoover. And William Warren Rogers became one of the top people on my graduate committee from that start. When I visit West Branch, I feel like singing Home Sweet Home. I have many old friends here. They're all older now than when I left. The Hoover Library holds a place in my heart, and I owe debts that I can never repay. I grew up in a small town and enjoyed the atmosphere and the fellowship. This present book is the best book I will ever write. Ask me for a personal card, which will lead you to my personal website, which I think you would enjoy. I don't know how many books I have left in me, but I don't think I have another left of the length and depth of research as this one. My dying wish is to be propped up alongside the other dummies in the Hoover Museum and spend my post-life there, because the Hoover Library to me is heaven. I hope some of you will drop by during that time as I'm propped up along with the other dummies to visit me. In West Branch, there's no such thing as a stranger. I had help Xeroxing. This was really a team game, and I was more of a coach than I was a player in some respects. I had help Xeroxing from 6 local 9th graders at the West Branch School, 1 college student, and 1 graduate student, and we Xeroxed the entire 300 oral histories contained in the archives here, every one of them, from graduate students, and we also Xeroxed every dissertation, PhD dissertation, and MA thesis that was held by the Hoover Library. A student of mine, a former student of mine in Milwaukee, Meredith Vanilla, who became a reference librarian, tracked down and bought and mailed to me a copy of every book ever written about Herbert Hoover. The first one was in 1917. Roughly amounted to about 200 books. I paid her only the cost of each book, nothing for a time, and she even paid for the mailing herself. Each one came in to Post Office Box 40, West Branch, Iowa. For a while, I even had a girlfriend in Cedar Rapids. I had a wonderful massage therapist in West Branch, and her mother kept my energies balanced by doing Reiki on me. Yes, these are all fond memories. I wonder what happened to them all. West Branch is a small town with a big heart. When the economy sank into the Great Recession in 2008, memories of the Great Depression were resurrected, and the name Herbert Hoover was dusted off for a new round of scolding. Once known as the great engineer and the great humanitarian, the man who had failed at nothing before becoming president watched his reputation disintegrate during the economic catastrophe. He became the object of partisan blame and historical chastisement. In 2008, the media glibly described Hoover as a miserly misanthrope, a man who would rather feed cows than people, hard-headed and hard-hearted, frozen in indifference. He was repeatedly reprimanded as a champion of laissez-faire, a term in philosophy he had specifically rejected as early as 1922 when he published his philosophical treatise, American Individualism. From the right, libertarian popular writer Amity Shlaes, author of The Forgotten Man and Coolidge, glibly impaled Hoover from the libertarian end of the spectrum. According to Shlaes, Hoover was a co-conspirator with Franklin D. Roosevelt, which would have surprised Hoover himself. The duo prolonged the Great Depression by meddling with the economy. The real hero, in her mind, was Hoover's first Treasury Secretary, Andrew Mellon, who advised him to leave well enough alone. The libertarian economic argument aside, in modern times, it is politically impossible to ignore an economic downturn. Writing history backwards produces distortions because it is often described in the way it should have happened instead of the way it actually happened. What people should have done instead of what they actually did. Too many of the books about Hoover have been what he did about what he did not do, not what he did. Historians cannot write history precisely as it happened because it is too long, too complicated, and not sufficiently self-explanatory. During his own presidency, Hoover's reputation plummeted to the point that Will Rogers quipped that a man bit into an apple, found the worm, and exclaimed, "Damn Hoover." During the 1932 campaign, Franklin D. Roosevelt branded Hoover a do-nothing president. FDR continued to run against Hoover, employing similar simplicities in 1936, 1940, and 1944, when his real opponents were Alf Landon, Wendell Willkie, and Thomas Dewey. Virtually every Democratic candidate since FDR has equated Hoover with hard times. Presidential polls of historians as late as 2008 rank him among the worst presidents. During the 2008 campaign, a Democratic senator condemned Hoover as a laissez-faire president, apathetic to the plight of the jobless. Even Republican candidate John McCain took up the cudgel against Hoover. In the second presidential debate, in an effort to portray his Democratic opponent, Barack Obama, as a big spender, McCain stated that the last president to raise taxes during hard times had been Herbert Hoover, forgetting that Franklin Roosevelt had raised taxes in 1935 and again in 1936, and that George H.W. Bush did so during the recession of the early 1990s after promising, read my lips, no new taxes. No one at the debate, neither McCain's opponent nor anyone in the print or television media, detected the gaffe. In fact, they still had not detected it by the third debate, so McCain repeated it. What is the truth about Hoover? Where does he fit in presidential historiography? And why does he remain enmeshed in a maze of myths? Is he a reactionary, a mainstream conservative, a progressive, or does he belong to the cutting edge of the New Deal? Dismissing Hoover as Ebenezer Scrooge, despite the fact that he succeeded Calvin Coolidge, is premised partly on the myth that the New Deal ended the Depression. It was a world war, it was World War II, and pent-up consumer demand after World War II that permanently really ended the Depression. Government spending alone to create jobs can never end a depression or a major recession in a capitalist economy, because the jobs end when the project ends or when the appropriation expires. Neither are tax cuts an infallible remedy, because people often hoard the money rather than spend it. A better idea would be to issue, and this is true today, would be to issue every adult American a debit card with an expiration date. Spend it or lose it. Hoover correctly believed that the key to ending the Depression was not creating new, temporary government jobs, but restoring old, permanent jobs. To set this record straight, unemployment was higher in all but one of the first 8 years of the New Deal than it was during the 4 years of the Hoover administration. It is certainly plausible to argue that the Depression worsened in spite of Hoover's actions, not because of them. And it is likely to have worsened between 1929 and 1932 with any other president in office, including Hoover's successor. Hoover's task was not enviable. In a victorious war, everyone fights together. In a depression, everyone fights each other. People sacrifice and accept artificial rationing during a major war, but complain and refuse to accept natural economic shortages during a depression. Hard times often bring out the worst in people. Blame becomes the national pastime. Those who have partisan or personal antipathy towards Hoover have stereotyped him as the primary villain of the Depression, a figure shrouded by the shadows of history, as evil and menacing as the Boston Strangler. In fact, had the Boston Strangler run against Hoover for president in 1932, it might have been a toss-up. People who voted that year believed that things could not possibly get worse. People who voted in Germany against the Weimar Republic that very year felt the same way. Upon retiring, Hoover marched into the Death Valley of historians, surrounded by writers, armed with pens and typewriters, occupying canyons on all sides. Unfortunately, some did not arm themselves with facts. An archivist from the Hoover Library once dined with the eminent economist, the late John Kenneth Galbraith, a Pulitzer Prize-winning economic historian. Galbraith had written, one of the things he wrote about was Hoover's role in the stock market crash of 1929 and the Great Depression. Well, the Hoover archivist and Galbraith met at a public dinner on the East Coast, and Galbraith asked the Hoover archivist what he did for a living. When he replied that he was employed at the Hoover Presidential Library, Galbraith, who was unaware that such a library existed, exclaimed, "A library for Herbert Hoover? How sad." Hoover's reputation had toppled into a black hole in which things go in but never come out. He was either too liberal or too conservative, too bland, too smug, a party leader to be a good party leader, and a stubborn partisan. He was all bad things to all people. Hoover was done for being unimaginative as well. When people think depression, they think Hoover. They might as well be synonyms in Roget's Thesaurus. Understanding Hoover's place in history requires historical context. In the 1910s and 1920s, Hoover was idolized by many progressives. As president, he was the most activist chief executive during hard times up to that time, the first to pit the government against the economic cycle. Many of his programs, such as the Reconstruction Finance Corporation, were vital to the New Deal. An argument can be made that he was one of the more liberal Republican presidents of the 20th century and the most innovative. He was the best idea man in his own administration. He wrote his own speeches because he believed that parroting ghostwriters was intellectually dishonest. He was the last president to do so. Yet Hoover was not Roosevelt writ small. He believed in personal responsibility, self-help, balanced budgets, decentralization, and a separation of powers. He deplored use of public jobs as political patronage, and one of his chief criticisms of the New Deal was that it was a huge machine, patronage machine, that ground out votes. He believed in states' rights, and in the late 1930s was a non-interventionist. In all of this, he remained true to his Quaker roots. The fact that Hoover was a Quaker is more important than that John Kennedy was a Catholic. Kennedy was more an outward symbolic Christian. Quakers do not necessarily find God between the walls of churches, but rather within their inner light, stripping religion of its artifacts. When they do attend church, their meeting houses are simple, their clothes are modest, rarely bright in color, and they take their purpose in life seriously. They do not honor high position, but purity of heart. Above all, they follow their own conscience and seek peace of mind. Hoover was not a typical Quaker. He was unusually bright and inventive, coupled with ferocious drive and mental and physical toughness. This was the source of some of his philanthropies, some conducted anonymously, and his commitment to public service, as well as his lack of ostentation. What mattered was not simply what you did, but why you did it. That is one reason he believed charity started at home, along with frugality and a sound education. Government aid should be available, but as a last resort rather than a first resort. Because it lacked a heart, government solutions were imperfect, perfunctory, and represented the easy way out. He favored private charity, not simply because it aided the indigent, but because it ennobled the giver. In many respects, Hoover's philosophy was more personal than political and does not fit a neat niche. He borrowed some attributes from classical liberalism, practical idealism, moderate conservatism, and the progressive movement. But he was more and less than all of these. If he was a conservative at all, he was an unconventional one. He thought out of the box. Hoover was no lover of bigness, whether big government, big business, big fortunes, or a big military establishment. His record shows he preferred to streamline and decentralize government, break up monopoly, regulate monopoly in the limited areas in which it served an essential purpose, and disperse large fortunes via inheritance and estate taxes. These views are also implicit in his relatively modest lifestyle, his belief that flaunting wealth was in bad taste, and his giving away of much of his own fortune. Hoover believed that not only democracy, but capitalism and any kind of human endeavor that required leadership must spring from the grassroots. He believed the family was the cornerstone of democracy, along with an educated citizenry, preferably in free public schools. He preferred small towns, especially farming communities, to the cities, including London and Manhattan, in which he spent most of his adult life. He believed strong bodies complemented strong minds. He believed in individuality, in self-discipline, that the only type of morality that really counts is when no one is looking. Hoover favored self-help and also in helping neighbors. If government help was essential, it should begin at the local level, ascend to the state level, and should be undertaken at the national level only when lower institutions closer to the people were unable to accomplish the job. At the same time, he was an activist. He was never a passive personality. He believed in aggressive government when the situation demanded it. Yet the bureaucracy created to solve temporary problems should be temporary, not the closest thing on earth to eternal life. He detested bureaucracy in all its forms. Bureaucracies inherently were inefficient, inflexible, and self-perpetuating. If there was a need for something, he wanted it to be handled in the simplest, most humane way possible. He believed bureaucracies lacked a humane touch and were wasteful, skimming off a great deal of their assets in overhead, tainted by nepotism and political favoritism. Hoover was unusually consistent in his beliefs. His foreign policy was integrated not only with his domestic policy, but with his Quaker roots that eschewed force in nearly all cases, but stopped short of absolute pacifism. He supported the League of Nations and diplomatic involvement on a broad variety of fronts, but did not believe America should become a world policeman. Prior to the Depression, he planned to make the preservation of world peace his greatest priority. His first act after his election in 1928 was a goodwill tour of Latin America, during which he used the term good neighbor policy, often attributed to Franklin Roosevelt, by which Hoover meant non-interference. He believed in protective tariffs, but considered the Smoot-Hawley tariff of 1930 excessively high, and signed it only reluctantly after Congress agreed to include a tariff commission that would permit the president to lower tariffs without returning to Congress for another round of log rolling. By the 1970s, with faith in big government dissipating in the wake of the war on poverty, high taxes, mounting debts, and the fear that government had grown too large, too impersonal, and too inefficient, historians on the left and the right began to find redeeming qualities in Hoover. He had, after all, predicted many of the evils critics now found in American society. Some New Left historians joined moderates in resurrecting Hoover from the ash heap of history. The fact that Hoover was both a reformer and a conservative seemed to some an oxymoron. Yet Hoover believed that most social and economic problems had to be solved gradually, with restraint. Hoover had always believed in the Quaker philosophy of equality of opportunity, but that did not extend to manufacturing equality of outcome, which he believed to be a practical impossibility. He doubtless would have opposed both affirmative action and the concept of entitlements. He believed that government should serve all of the people rather than cater to interest groups. Further, he shared the conservative view of uplifting all by a consistently growing economy rather than slicing the economic pie differently in a static economy. As long as human imagination prevailed, there would be new frontiers of opportunity and experience. The Hoover rebirth was born in the flush of the 1980s and the renaissance of a more charismatic conservative hero, Ronald Reagan, who won plaudits for his tough yet nuanced Cold War diplomacy and his determination to fight communism with the dollar. Reagan drove home the theme that government had become its own and the people's worst enemy. If Hoover had possessed Reagan's oratorical ability and Reagan had possessed Hoover's brilliant mind, there might have been the making of a super president. Someday, through genetic engineering, perhaps. To evaluate Hoover in historical context, we must compare him to his predecessors, not simply to his successors, and not simply to his immediate successor. All too often, Hoover is used as a foil for Roosevelt, or a straw man to enhance Roosevelt's reputation, which is unnecessary. Hoover mitigated the Depression, but did not end it. His administration was not a total failure, but rather an incomplete success, if ending the Depression is a criterion for success. By that standard, the New Deal, too, was an incomplete success. It has been said of Hoover that he is a political orphan, too progressive for the conservatives and too conservative for the radicals. Before the Depression sucked the life out of his plans to utilize social science to reform every nook and cranny of American life, Hoover had entered office with exceptionally high expectations, a warning to any president who enters office with such expectations. Hoover was in fact neither a free market purist nor a reckless experimenter. He wanted his experiments to have a relatively high chance of succeeding. There were limits to his progressivism and the degree to which he was willing to have the government intervene in the economy and in the lives of Americans. However, he intended to carefully define and delineate the role of government, and when possible, to rely on cooperation rather than compulsion. However, those who criticize Hoover for relying too heavily on voluntarism tend to forget that FDR's most sweeping program for economic and reform and recovery, the National Recovery Administration, the NRA, had no teeth and relied solely on voluntary compliance. Moreover, the Supreme Court during Hoover's tenure and much of Roosevelt almost certainly would have nullified a more coercive approach. Hoover accepted a social safety net within limits. He did not believe either the rich or the poor were inherently predatory, and he resisted demonizing them. He believed individuals had a right to the fruits of their labors, which were frequently unequal. The purpose of government, he thought, should be to strengthen and support free enterprise, not compete with it. During the 1920s and 1930s, Hoover strove to implement his philosophy of government in order to encourage and stimulate both capital and labor without rending the fabric of democracy. He disliked the types of solutions that involved partisanship by pitting one group against another. His underlying purpose was to preserve American traditions that had served the nation well, especially equality of opportunity, while updating them and adopting them to a modern technological society. Education played a key role. Thus, he wanted to integrate the old with the new, to evenly pace progress and not dash around like the Mad Hatter, nor tarry at the pace of a tortoise. He searched for ways to solve problems such as Social Security and provide greater security for employment, as well as adjusting production to consumption and providing a greater distribution of wealth, long before these ideas were seriously attempted, much less accomplished. But his method was to lead, not to browbeat, and to employ existing institutions when possible. He did not resist change, but neither did he care for change for the sake of change. Hoover was not a great president, but because there is no singular accomplishment which can point to that, which would place him in the triage of great presidents. I might point out that every president generally considered a great president, Washington, Lincoln, and FDR, are all credited with winning wars. Hoover was not an astute politician, because politics was not a major priority for him. But taken over the course of his life, Hoover was a great man. Perhaps no man was more devoted to the service of his nation, both before and after his years in the White House, than was Hoover. Jimmy Carter, as an ex-president, perhaps, but Carter's presidency was not bookended by such outstanding achievements. One of the overlooked aspects of Hoover's contributions were the books he wrote, 33, second only to Theodore Roosevelt among all presidents. Style did not come easily to him, yet good writing consists of more than good style. It also includes content. Few have left so thorough and unpretentious an account of his life and epoch that it would be virtually impossible to reconstruct these years without these words, some of which must have been painful for Hoover to write. Hoover was writing nearly until the day he died, in longhand, no less. He had learned one of the great lessons of life: never quit. Sometimes Hoover swam against the tides of history, but he never drifted. He never gave up. Hoover always followed his conscience and never took the easy way out, never dodged challenges. Many of his Cassandra-like warnings about the addictive nature of overspending and reliance on large government with its ever-growing bureaucracy now seem prophetic. In many respects, he was not behind his times, but ahead of them. Sometimes Hoover, like Woodrow Wilson, a man he admired, was right in principle, but wrong in degree. He predicted that communism would implode, and was wrong only in the timing. He predicted bureaucracy would explode, and was right in the timing, but probably underestimated the degree. He had great faith in the people, even though voters are fickle. And he knew that democracy was a method, not magic. That it only means that more than 50% of the people are right more than 50% of the time. Hoover's personality is probably as little understood as his presidency. He had a better sense of humor than most people realize, partly because it was too subtle for the masses. Few know the depth of his love for children, or how well read he was, especially in history. He knew the past, and he also knew that children were the future. Hoover was that rare man who answers in the affirmative whether a great man can be a good man. His administration ended without a serious scandal on its record. He was honest to a fault, the kind of honesty that includes intellectual honesty. He wrote his own speeches because he believed ghostwritten speeches are dishonest. His wife Lou wrote her own speeches too. Perhaps Hoover was honest to a fault. I doubt our present political system is capable of producing such a man again. His integrity and other traits can be attributed partly to his Quaker rearing, partly to the struggle of making his own way as an orphan, and partly to growing up on the cusp of the frontier. Yet West Branch has produced many Quakers, other orphans, and those of Hoover's time all live on the frontier. Yet West Branch has produced only one, Herbert Hoover. Part of what made him who he was simply something inside of him. He had gifts, and he made the most of his life. He never cheated his maker. In fact, he never cheated anyone. My book on Hoover is an effort to remove Hoover's reputation from the dustbin of history and evaluate him fairly and realistically. Long a source of misrepresentation, distortion, and neglect, perhaps more original things remain to be said about Hoover than about any but our most recent presidents. You can help, if you agree, by writing a short review on Amazon.com. Upon entering the presidency, Hoover embarked upon a profession that does not reward modesty, but rather flourishes on boasting and self-aggrandizement. Some of his personal virtues, such as absolute intellectual honesty and meticulous fidelity to financial loyalty and modesty, were all perceived as political vices. Yet Hoover wanted to uplift the moral level of politics and reform rather than have politics as usual drag him down to its level. In this, he succeeded. He refused to stoop to negativity about his opponents, even though he became the most vilified president since Abraham Lincoln. A perception that persists in some quarters down to the present day. Yet his constituents elected him precisely because he was not a politician. In the wake of the Harding scandals, the last thing people wanted was another career politician. The ambition of most politicians is to perpetuate themselves in office. On the day after the election, they began to think about the next election. Hoover had no such ambition. The only reason he wanted to be president at all was he wanted to involve himself in public service, but he believed that he could do the most good at the highest level. He did not want deliberately to make himself unpopular, but that was the price of doing the right thing. He was willing to pay it. Hoover was not impressed by purely political arguments, nor was he daunted by political obstacles. Yet, he was more flexible than most people realize. He worked better with a divided Congress than nearly any other president during hard times. And during the 72nd Congress, he achieved the most integrated domestic program since Woodrow Wilson's first term. Part of his secret is that he did not care who received the credit. He did believe in political parties, however, and he felt that the two-party system was a cornerstone of American democracy. He also believed in separation of powers and respected the other branches of government. He was scrupulous about observing the limitations of the Constitution, and not a single bill he signed was declared unconstitutional. He adhered to the constitutional dictum that certain rights were reserved to the states. He disliked bigness, whether big government, big business, or a big military. Monopoly, including a monopoly of power by the government, inevitably led to abuses. Perhaps it would not be a bad idea to apply the anti-monopoly philosophy to the government itself. Hoover never demeaned his opponents or publicly questioned their motives, nor did he resort to negative campaigning. He rested his opposition on objections to policies, not the belittling of individuals. He did not scapegoat, complain, or place blame. He did not build his reputation upon the ruins of the reputation of others. He fought the political wars fairly, win or lose. His objective was never to win at all costs, much less to gloat about it. He accepted defeat with dignity and determined to remain useful. He never lost his self-deprecating sense of humor. Hoover did not confuse politics with immortality, nor political immortality with the immortality of the human soul. He packed ferocious drive into a strong body combined with a near-genius intelligence, a retentive memory, intellectual curiosity, enduring vitality, and a sense of humility that sprang from his Quaker roots and followed him to the grave. Hoover loved children, and they loved him. If Reagan was the great communicator with television audiences, Hoover was the great communicator with children. Most of his humanitarian undertakings were animated by the fact that he could not bear to see children suffer or starve. He was moved by the innocence and artlessness of children, their naivete and their honesty. They had to be taught by adults how to be dishonest. Hoover respected all people, including children, though he recognized and witnessed human folly. He realized that all relationships must begin with respect, proceed to trust, and finally be bonded by love. The process requires patience. Patience, he believed, was the essence of virtue. Above all, Hoover was a highly patient man. Anyone whose favorite avocation was fishing had to be a patient person. And anyone as resilient as Hoover had to be patient. He had to be patient to await historical redemption, but he shall have it. Though many people think of Hoover as a workaholic, he was happiest either when he was with children or when he soaked up the replenishing energy and calm, reflective moods in the outdoors. He was completely absorbed in the outdoor world, as single-minded in his pursuit of fish as he was in seeking to resolve the Great Depression. Fishing was his favorite outdoor hobby. He did not have the aggressiveness to hunt, but he found fish, wily and worthy opponents. Hoover enjoyed his greatest peace of mind in the outdoors. He probably spent more time surrounded by mountains, lakes, and forests than any 20th century president except for Theodore Roosevelt. He fished, camped, and scaled mountains in some of the most rugged regions of America. He never really left the pastoral, idealistic settings of the Iowa fields and the Oregon forests where he had lived his entire life before departing for college at Stanford. He began pole fishing as a child in Iowa and later learned to fly fish in Oregon. He always used flies for fishing, artificial flies, except when he was a boy and he used worms. And the only time he used live bait as an adult were his later experiences in deep sea fishing. Hoover was active and competitive. While he enjoyed the scenery, he wanted to catch fish, scale them, cook them, and eat them. He liked nothing better than cooking fresh fish over an open fire. He always built fire by stacking sticks and logs Indian style, as he had learned from Indian playmates as a child. Hoover's writing about fishing demonstrated his poetic and whimsical side. Those who have been told for generations that Hoover was an inept writer should read such passages that follow from Fishing for Fun and To Wash Your Soul, which Hoover wrote. He demonstrates the linguistic malleability of a poet leavened with humor. He explained what made fishing meaningful to him. It is the break of waves in the sun, the contemplation of the eternal flow of the stream, the stretch of forest and mountain in their manifestation of the Maker. It is all these that soothe our troubles, shame our wickedness, and inspire us to esteem our fellow man, especially other fishermen. Then he quipped, there are lots of people who committed crimes last year who would not have done so had they been fishing. Hoover wrote that fishing induced, quote, a mockery of prophets and conceits, a quieting of hate, and a hushing to ambition, a rejoicing that you do not have to do a blanket thing until next week. Thank you. I would take any.
Yeah, Lynn is getting the microphone, and so if you have a question, if you just raise your hand, the microphone will be passed.
Right here, the woman in white.
Could you speak a bit about the relationship between Herbert Hoover and President Harry Truman?
Yes, it grew to be a quite close relationship. And Hoover, Roosevelt had never invited Hoover to come to the White House during all 4 of his terms. Truman invited him to the White House within a few weeks of becoming president. Truman created a commission to downsize and reorganize government and to simplify it, and appointed Hoover, whom the committee voted chair. And it was known as the first Hoover Commission. And a lot of its recommendations were enacted into law under Truman. A second Hoover Commission was created by President Eisenhower, again, who asked Hoover to chair it, and he did, and a number of its suggestions were adopted into law. Hoover and Truman had certain things in common. As youths, they had both been poor. They had both lived in rural areas. Truman had grown up on a farm, and they were both very down to earth. But there were differences. Truman was much more an aggressive politician than Hoover was. And he was a machine politician, a part of the Pendergast machine in Missouri. And he went to great lengths to get elected. That was very much more a priority to Truman than it was to Hoover. He even stooped to criticizing Hoover during his bid for re-election. After Truman left the White House, Truman and Hoover were the only living presidents, and ex-presidents. And this is the time that they really bonded. They were there for the dedication of one another's libraries. And I neglected to say that Hoover had initially gained his reputation as a humanitarian by feeding Belgium and in much of Europe during World War I. During the Truman administration, the first part of it, World War II ended, and much of the world again was in tatters and in need of replenishment. And Truman used Hoover as his point man on world relief of world hunger. He sent him on several around the world trips to assess hunger where food was most needed, to set priorities. And then after that trip, he sent Hoover again by air to visit the various nations where plenty existed in agriculture, where they had a surplus, such as in South America, in Argentina particularly. And the United States did not have good relations with Argentina, with the dictatorship, and Hoover managed to soothe relations between the Argentine dictator and the American government and receive large exports of food to other countries in recompense. Anything else?
This is speculation, but knowing what you know about President Hoover's writings, I wonder if he had been president in the 50s and 60s when the issue of desegregation was occurring in the United States, and knowing his beliefs about states' rights, how do you think he would have handled his role as president in that issue?
Well, it's part of the Quaker creed and Hoover's creed to believe in equality of opportunity. And so I think he would have been a major supporter of desegregation and would have used force very reluctantly, but he would have used it if necessary. But Hoover did not believe in equality of outcome, that everyone deserves the same thing in life. It depends on their ability and their efforts. So I think he would not have approved on such things as affirmative action, on the ground that that detracted from the natural competition of a capitalist society that it needs to grow. Yes.
How many questions am I allowed?
How many do you have?
I have 3 for sure. First, just a comment. When I think of equality of opportunity, I think of Alexis de Tocqueville. That was his big statement anyway. I guess it's the Quakers too. What was the spark for you as a student to want to go ahead and write about Hoover?
Okay, well, for one thing, it was an opportunity. I mean, it was something that was very obviously lacking. A full biography of Hoover or a fair biography of his presidency. So it was that. I started out by writing a few articles. I managed to get, in the end, 22 grants for my research on Hoover, which lasted about 10 years and resulted in a previous book called Herbert Hoover Fighting Quaker, which was just on the presidency, which I published in 2012. I found them very interesting, and as a historian, you look for trying to do stuff that's new and different, where you can be creative and make a contribution, and not just rehash the same thing that's been written about over and over again. So it was an opportunity. I didn't know how it was going to end up when I started. When I came to the Hoover Library to work, there were such magnificent resources here. I had so many people helping me out of the goodness of their heart without being paid or anything. The staff here was so good that I enjoyed it probably more than anything I've ever done.
Okay. Second question is, when was it known that the Great Depression was the Great Depression? Because I imagine he didn't know, Hoover didn't know, people didn't know, hey, I guess we're entering the Great Depression now.
Well, this was, name was given by historians after the fact, rather than at the time it happened. You know, I think it first appeared probably in the mid to late 30s in newspapers and things, and wits like Will Rogers and that. But mainly labels like that are done in retrospect. You're correct, not at the time they happen, because you have to put it in some perspective, and it takes some perspective in time, you know, to see. It remains to be seen whether the label Great Recession of 2008 will endure historically, or whether we will encounter an even greater recession somewhere down the line, which will bump it off the map. So.
And do you know if, kind of leading into that, after the stock market crash,
Yeah.
did Hoover go back and do any reading about previous, well, of course, they didn't know it was a depression, but going back to previous times in American history when there was a slump in the economy, to help him figure out what to do next or how to remedy things?
No, Hoover was his best own idea man. He really did not borrow ideas from his reading, although he was a voracious reader. But when he came up with a problem, he was a problem solver. He did not go for other people or books or things like that. And he really didn't have the time to do that kind of research. Hoover not only wrote his own speeches, he wrote almost all of his own legislation, the bills, word for word. And during his administration, not a single law signed by Hoover was declared unconstitutional. Hoover, all his life, had been a great reader and lover of history. And so I imagine that the kind of reading you're thinking about, that he had already done, and he jumped at trying to apply some of what he had learned. But he was very practical. He didn't follow, you know, rules or precedences necessarily. So while he did not read directly to solve contemporary problems, he had a vast knowledge of world history that he utilized as president. And history was really his favorite form of reading. He also, though, did a lot of reading just to relax and enjoy himself, a lot of fiction. And this was a lifelong trait. And even during the busy time of his presidency, he set aside some time each day of his life for pleasure reading, even when he was president. He usually did this late at night after everyone else had gone to bed. And he had an incredible amount of stamina. He got by on 3 or 4 hours of sleep a night, really, and he often woke up at night and stuff. But he always read for pleasure, even when he was in Australia, when he was in China, when he was in Belgium, when he was aboard ship, he always read. So he loved reading for its own sake, and he learned it for what he learned from it.
Apparently Shakespeare as well, according
Yes.
to what I saw.
Yes, absolutely, he read Shakespeare. And some of the stuff in my book and my writing are phrases borrowed from Shakespeare as well, because I also am a big fan.
Just a comment and then one more question. Quick comment about when I was, again, looking out in the museum, Stanford, the first thing that came to my mind was Silicon Valley. You know, he's kind of ahead of his time because that's where it all happened. So.
I went out to Stanford too, spent several weeks there at the War Institution. Go ahead.
And then the last question is, okay, so Hoover had never had elected office
Right.
before being president, so, but he had this sense of service and had been appointed positions. So what made him think, well, I guess I'll just, I've never run for elective office. I'm not really interested in being a politician, but I guess I'd like to be president. Where did that come from?
It wasn't really of his doing. He was more or less drafted. He was more or less didn't decide, I want to be president. He was asked to run by Republican leaders. And he had been such a success as Secretary of Commerce, and his reputation as the great engineer and the great humanitarian, that they figured he would be a certain winner in 1928. And of course he did win overwhelmingly. So one thing about Hoover that was a political, it's a personal attribute that is part good, but in politics is not good, and that was his modesty. He did not really enjoy running for office. He did not involve the political part of politics. The self-praise, the going out and making speeches, and the horse trading that goes on. What he enjoyed was the work of the presidency. And of course, that wasn't entirely pragmatic, you know, but what he enjoyed was not getting to be president, but what he could do after he got there. So.
Thank you.
Sure. Thank you.
Couple of quick ones,
Yeah.
unrelated to each other. Is there still a active Quaker church in West Branch?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, it's still a largely Quaker community. I don't know if there's the old-fashioned meeting house, but a good percentage of the population here, when I lived in town, is still Quaker.
Okay, once in a while I listen to C-SPAN, Book TV. Have you been on there? Are you going to be on there?
I'd like to, but I don't, not as far as I know.
Okay, well, I'll look for you.
Okay, thank you.
One question.
Right here, there.
You say he was not a great president, but would you agree that he was probably the greatest and most influential Secretary of Commerce that we've
Absolutely.
ever had?
Not only that, not only was he that, and he was indeed that, but he was the only Secretary of Commerce ever elected president.
Yeah. It seems to me that his main impact on the development of the country comes as Secretary of Commerce rather than as president.
I think that's probably true, because he was a great administrator, and he did not have to deal with Congress or anything. He was free to kind of work his own way and accomplish the goals he set without having to dip into politics. He thoroughly enjoyed being Secretary of Commerce, and yeah, I think still to this day he's the greatest Secretary of Commerce there's been. It wasn't one of the high-ranking cabinet officials then or now. I mean, in the hierarchy of cabinet positions. But he certainly thoroughly enjoyed it, and he reached his hand into many aspects of the economy that had never been done before. We have one here too.
And the last question will go to Reverend Paulus.
Okay. Thanks, Tom.
Well, this is not so much a question as it is a memory I have of programs here at the library. I've been involved in past years in a number of them here. And one, they show this marvelous film that was made of Hoover fishing with his little granddaughter, who I think was about 3 years old. It is the most delightful filming. I hope that maybe it can be hauled out to show, because when you say he loved children, that particular bit of film just captures that completely and totally. It is just a delight to watch. I think she was about 3 or thereabouts, and he was helping.
It's in the Rapidan cabin.
Yeah, it's just one of the most delightful things to show what a really down-to-earth grandpa he was.
Yeah, he loved all children, he loved his own children the most. There's one other thing that should be mentioned, which has been neglected, and I mean, they had a great marriage, he and Lou Henry. I can't think of a presidential marriage that was better. Doesn't mean there isn't one, it just means I can't think of one. And probably nobody but me knows the depth of that. But Lou Henry and he met at Stanford in geology class. Dr. Matt Branner introduced them. He was their mentor for both of them. She was the first woman to earn a degree in geological engineering, his field, at Stanford, and only the fourth in the history of the United States at the time she earned that degree. She was also a tremendously talented, gifted writer. She was much better stylistically than he was, and she could write all types of stuff. Hoover mostly stuck to history and biography and government. But Lou, she was fluent in 5 foreign languages, including Chinese. And besides that, she could read Latin, which of course isn't a spoken language, except in churches sometimes. But their marriage was really one of tremendous love and compatibility. It's very sad that she died 20 years before he died. And after that, he never so much as had a single date or looked for a female social companion in any way. Each of them were the only true love of their lives to each other. So, yeah, she was very good. The reason she didn't publish as much as he did is that she did not have his ferocious drive, And she started, I've read fragments of them, a lot of very interesting things, including fiction, and she set them aside because she became interested in something else, and and they never got published. Maybe somebody could dig them out and publish them today. Yes?
Both of the Hoovers were very much associated with scouting also.
Not really. Lou was the president of the Girl Scouts of America, and while she was First Lady, she was head of a den that met at the White House. And Lou was also very involved in women athletics at a time when not a lot of young women and girls were getting involved in athletics. Those were two of her big interests. What was the second part of your question?
I said both Herbert and his wife.
Oh, yes, his was a scouting. His biggest interest in young people as an ex-president was with the Boys Clubs of America. And Hoover had moved from a rural childhood to living in big cities for most of his adult life. He lived in London for 20 years, and he lived in New York in the Waldorf Astoria in Manhattan for most of his ex-presidency. And the Boys Clubs of America were created to give urban boys, to deter them from delinquency when they had extra time, and give them wholesome recreation, to train them in useful arts and crafts, sponsoring sports teams, lessons in swimming, libraries, newspapers for reading, and in many of the areas in which boys clubs were established, the youth crime rate went way down.
On that note, let's thank Professor Jeansonne.